Hello and welcome to Dialogue. Under former President Donald Trump, cooperation and exchanges between China and the United States suffered across the board and relations soured. When President Biden in office, there are hopes for revival. But where are China-U.S. relations now, and what are the prospects for the future? Will the two work together, and can cooperation replace competition? To talk about those issues and more, I'm joined by Dr. Zhao Hai, Research Fellow at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, Professor Jeffrey Sach, Director of the Center of Sustainable Development at Columbia University, and later on by Professor Zhao Daojun of Peking University. That's our topic. I'm Zhou Yue. And on Tuesday, Chinese Politburo member and director of the Central Foreign Affairs Commission Office, Yang Jiechi, spoke about the state of China-U.S. relations and the prospects for the future. Well, he said the relations had been strained because of what he called the Trump administration's misguided policies against China. So let me start with you, Zhao Hai. With Trump no longer in the White House, does China expect that the U.S. will change its China policy dramatically?
Well, I don't think so. I think, first of all, even if Trump left his office, his influence is still there. And you can feel that in American politics domestically right now. And because of his continuous influence and this deeply rooted Trumpism in American politics, so nowadays, it's very hard to thaw the ice between the two countries right away. However, I think China expects Biden's China policy will be different from Trump's policy, but the details are still to be told, and Beijing is still waiting.
And Jeffrey, what do you think the Biden administration will do differently towards China than Trump?
The good news is it will be a lot more rational than the Trump administration, because Trump was not himself a rational person, and he was leading a movement that was not predictable or rational. President Biden is far more careful, far more serious, far more experienced, and therefore I think we have a chance and a need also for a more stable, cooperative relationship. So I think the style will be very different. It's true that in the United States, I'd say in both political parties right now, there is an anti-China mood, and I don't think that's changing immediately by any means. But on the other hand, there is really a chance for a much more serious approach. The Biden team, both in economics and in foreign policy, is a lot more experienced, a lot more seasoned. It's not hardliners per se. It's not people on crusades or out for their own political glory like Pompeo was, who was a terrible Secretary of State and was part of the instigation. There are not heated ideologues in the White House like Navarro. We had a lot of people who were in the fringe of thinking during the Trump period, and I think we have a lot more sensible people in authority right now. This doesn't solve all the problems. I think the most important is for the two sides, two governments, to be speaking with each other directly and not only through the media. So I'm looking forward to that.
But as you said, Jeffrey, Trump and his associates have built up a sentiment against China, and they did it quite successfully. And now there is bipartisan consensus that China is not only a strategic competitor, but possibly an opponent to the United States. How can Biden work against public sentiment like that? Any policies that is less than standing their ground, being tough towards China, will sound and look like a defeat.
Well, I think it's important for two serious countries to have a serious look at areas where cooperation is absolutely vital. For example, stopping COVID-19 is a joint responsibility of the United States and China in terms of implementing vaccines, making sure that the entire world is taking appropriate measures. Remember how completely irresponsible Trump was, really idiotic, and America has had more than 430,000 deaths from COVID because of that irresponsibility. So this is an area where both sides need to cooperate and can cooperate. Both countries need to cooperate on international finance right now to make sure that the multilateral institutions are handling a very, very complicated and difficult international financial environment because of COVID.
Wow.
Both sides need to cooperate on climate change, where both countries, unlike Trump, are now committed to decarbonizing the economy. And so I see the fundamental point that there are powerful needs of both countries for cooperating with each other. And that means that even though political mood and often silly politicians in my country say one thing or another, the serious work really needs to get underway.
Yeah. And Zhao Hai, top Chinese pulmonologist who's also a public health expert, Dr. Zhong Nanshan, is the Chinese version of Anthony Fauci. He actually shared many of Fauci's views on fighting the pandemic and hopes for cooperations. But what are the chances of real U.S.-China cooperation on ending the pandemic, and what specific measures can they proceed with?
Well, let me say this. I don't think that the two countries need to cooperate for the cooperation's sake. I think they need to cooperate with each other for themselves. And because we have deep common interest in countering COVID-19 or helping to maintain the stability of global financial system, and also to try to counter the climate change, that's why we need to cooperate. That's the new reality. So first of all, both countries need to recognize, come back to reality, recognize that we're facing common challenges, and these common challenges cannot be solved without we're helping each other and trying to get together to counter the threats. So I think that's number one thing. Then number two, in terms of details of cooperation, there are many things we can do for both countries. For instance, the production of vaccines are now in a bottleneck, and China and the United States can certainly cooperate with each other to expand the production of vaccines, and also they need to try to figure out how to standardize the transportation standards so that the moving of vaccines can be smoothed to developing countries and to distribute evenly among developing countries between the developing and developed countries. And thirdly, I think most importantly, how to finance the vaccination of the globe. And the money needs to be paid, and China and the United States and also other countries need to pour in the money and get together to finance the vaccination that's both good for each country and for the world together.
And Jeffrey, you agree maybe there are areas that really the two sides can work on to improve our response to COVID?
I think it's essential, and all of those points just made are superb points. This is very practical work. China's very, very good at the logistics, and fortunately we have effective vaccines coming out of China, effective vaccines coming out of the United States. We have a major logistical equity challenge also to ensure that even poor countries get these vaccines, which again is in our own interest. Because wherever the epidemic is spreading, it's creating these new dangerous strains that could break out from the vaccines. We have a self-interest to make sure that everybody gets these vaccines as fast as possible. We also can work together in the International Monetary Fund for a new allocation of special drawing rights, SDRs, the reserves of the IMF, because those reserves could then be directed towards financing the vaccine implementation, for example. So even the finance and the stopping the COVID-19 are related. And if the two countries work together, it's very powerful, very positive, and very much in self-interest as well as global interest.
Let's also talk about the flashpoints, Jeffrey. As you said, Trump had many extreme measures against China. Some of them are the red lines considered by China. And Yang Jiechi also mentioned that. He said China never meddles with U.S. internal affairs, including its elections. He warned the U.S. not to cross the red line on hot-button issues like Hong Kong and Xinjiang. Where does the current U.S. administration stand on this? I know that probably a Democratic administration is more ideology-driven. Will Biden cross those red lines?
Well, I think rhetorically, definitely both Xinjiang and Hong Kong are already in the talking points of the new Secretary of State. He gave an interview yesterday where he pointed out deep U.S. concerns about both. And frankly, my strong feeling and advice is that the two governments talk directly to each other, not through public broadcasts only, though I'm happy we're having a public broadcast, but in truth, it's really governments that should be discussing, sharing points of view, expressing concerns. These are two very big, powerful nations, and cooperation is vital for the world. And you can't do it. The worst part about Trump, there were so many terrible things, but having a foreign policy by tweet was completely reckless, absolutely reckless. We don't need a foreign policy by sound bites. We need a foreign policy that is extensive discussion between the two countries about areas of mutual concern, explaining to each other the situation, expressing concerns, expressing what are key areas, sensitive areas, and so forth. So I really hope that this doesn't get into quickly some kind of rhetorical escalation, which is possible, which I worry about, frankly, because that would be completely unconstructive.
And we've also collected some opinions from social media users who are concerned about China-U.S. relations. Let's take a look at some of them. Here, Kenton T-Bot said China is trying to set the terms of engagement with the U.S., clearly signaling its red lines while laying out zones of flexibility and cooperation. Expect period of testing through each one while each side tests the contours of these terms of engagement. My question is, Zhao Hai, it seems the Biden administration is in no hurry to engage with China. China has been sending its high-profile officials. Last week, Vice President Wang Qishan talked with some Americans, and this week, State Councilor Yang Jiechi also made a speech on China-U.S. relations. What do you make of the Biden administration's reluctance to engage with China directly right now?
I think because China right now is a thorny issue for American domestic politics, and it is not like the old days that the president can dictate foreign policy. It's very difficult right now because China has loomed very large in American politics, the fighting between the conservatives and liberals, and also because of the Trump legacy that is very hard to get rid of. And once the Biden administration approached China and trying to alter some of the legacies that Trump administration, and particularly in the last 2 months where Pompeo left behind, they will come back and attack him from every possible angle. So they must approach it carefully so that they don't give the other side excuses to attack politically. I think that's reason number one. And reason number two is that I think they hope to do it in small steps to accumulate mutual trust, and then later on to tackle the most important and difficult questions. So at this point, they need to take care of their domestic affairs like COVID and economy instead of dealing with China head on, which is going to be very difficult and will have blowback to their politics.
Jeffrey, what do you think? We understand that Biden administration is probably pretty preoccupied with COVID response, But China-U.S. relations is very important, not only for America, but for the entire world. When do you think Biden will think clear and come up with clear strategies and tactics?
I think that there should be at least some important discussions right now on the issues we've been talking about, COVID, international finance, climate change, because we have an important global summit coming up in Glasgow in November that is of very important mutual interest. So I hope that some actions are taken now. But it is absolutely the case that the United States is preoccupied with the really deep internal problems that are a legacy of Trump. There's an impeachment process coming up, which is very much inward looking. There are major challenges within the U.S. that President Biden has to address. So I think that a quiet period, if that's what it would be, in the next couple of months would be fine, actually. We don't have to put U.S.-China relations on the front burner in the most visible way, but I think it's important that constructive decisions and actions and dialogue in public health and international finance on climate policy should get started very soon among senior officials, not necessarily the top officials on both sides, but senior officials, because there's a lot of groundwork to do in those areas, and they are very important, and they're important in a timely way in 2021.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jeffrey. And Zhao Hai, do you think the Chinese decision makers also have some patience until Biden clean his own house and come up with a reasonable China policy?
I think on China's side, Chinese leaders have the patience needed to correct the relationship between the two. However, I have one point to add to what I said just now. I think right now within the Biden administration, and there are some people thinking that the Trump legacy could be used as bargaining chip against China. And letting those tariffs or sanctions stay in place without getting rid of those in advance, giving them somehow advantage to continue keeping pressure on China. So some, I think, waiting for China to make concessions first instead of trying to talk with China first. And that will be a bad tactic, I think, on American side. The best way to approach is still to reopen the communication channel as soon as possible, even though policy changes could come later. But I think understanding each other's strategic goals and each other's intentions are the most important things, just like Politburo member Yang Jiechi pointed out this morning.
And talking about face-to-face times, President Trump, former President Trump, adopted a lot of restrictive measures on people-to-people exchanges, including academics. So do you think Biden will probably pedal back some of the policies and have better communications with the Chinese?
I think certainly Biden administration will think about that first, because those Trump administration legacies trying to blocking the communications between the people-to-people exchanges are the most unreasonable. And it's also harmful to American reputation and American domestically, to their academics and also journalism. So I think first thing to go are those measures taken by the former State Department Secretary Pompeo, and when they get rid of those really erroneous policies against China, in response, I think China could also trying to respond in goodwill, and both countries can bring back the original level of people-to-people communication. That would be very helpful.
Let's bring in another guest, Mr. Zhao Daojun from Peking University. Mr. Zhao, talking about the geopolitics between China and the U.S., what will Biden administration do in Asia? Is it 2.0 of Obama's pivot to Asia? Will that mean better chances of conflict in Taiwan Strait, in the South China Sea? What is your thinking?
As it looks, given the arrangement for the a Taiwan representative to be at the inaugural ceremony, it seems to me the geopolitical posturing from the Biden administration is a combination of Obama 2.2 and Trump 2.2. It does not come across as very positive or encouraging at all.
Mm-hmm. Why do you say that? What specific moves will Biden make?
Well, actually, you see, the inauguration of a new president, especially by a major country like the United States, is a serious sovereign act. By having the Taiwan representative there and not having redone the official relationship, it was a very powerful statement. You can even go, to the extreme of saying this was in many ways trying to tie the Chinese hands, forcing China to choose, forcing mainland, I mean. And this is I'm not trying to sound alarmist. I think we need to look at.
But you don't consider that just a grandstanding gesture because Biden understands they will not provoke China on those core issues.
No. This is not just temporary. It was well thought out. These are a team of veterans, and very much like the phone call Mr. Trump picked up when after he had just been elected back in 2016. No, this is a serious business.
And Zhao Hai, what do you think? If this geopolitical tension is on the rise, then the possibility of economic cooperation is even shrinking.
Well,
we have
Zhao Hai.
seen reports that the Biden administration is going to
Okay,
further
Mr. Zhao,
strengthen.
you insist on talking because this question is for Zhao Hai.
Well, I think if you look at the declassified documents coming back to 2017 on Indo-Pacific strategy from the Trump administration, it is very clear that they want to play the Taiwan card. And now they have come, after 3 years of building up the tension across the Taiwan Strait, they're selling more weapons, more advanced weapons to Taiwan. They're having more high-level official exchanges. They're having more and more actions that are across this gray zone and strapping on the China's red line. So I think this is a very dangerous game. And I think China's sovereignty is most important core national interest. So I think economic relations come second. If the United States gonna get across this red line, and particularly Biden administration refuse to go back and recognize China's sovereignty, it's going to be very difficult to have cooperative relations and to reduce tensions between the two countries in the near future.
So, Mr. Jia, you don't think Biden understands the significance, the seriousness of this, because that will undermine China-U.S. relations totally?
Listen, there is a very little that you can say that the American side does not understand the Chinese sensitivities or demands or insistence. There is very little that you can say that the Chinese side does not understand the U.S. side. This is really a matter of choice. It's a matter of vision. It's a matter of being serious about consequences. And of course they understand.
Okay,
it's
let's also talk about the technology frontiers. Of course, one of the legacies is the trade wars and the tech wars between China and the U.S. Mr. Zhao, where do you think this is going during the Biden administration? Will America cut off technological cooperation between the two major economies?
We need to differentiate between the different technologies that we're talking about. Some are very strictly military. Some are very, cutting edge competitive. For example, in renewable energy, in 5G telecommunications. Some, that's a third category, like for medicine and for vaccines, that should really be, considering the general welfare of the patients, of the consumers. And there are some that's really open for competition at the market level, does not always have. So we need to differentiate that between the four categories at least. And there is a fifth category. Some technologies are need to be discarded because they cause too much pollution or they, cause too much
But
human
you think
labor.
Biden has a clear definition which is which?
I don't think it's him. I think it's the particular companies, particular sectors in each of those categories that are lobbying the U.S. government one way or another. But one thing you have to remember is that we have now come to a very different age. This is not the same sort of China-U.S. before 1979, whereas the U.S. was the teacher and the China was the apprentice or student. Now, there are so many things. If you think about those 5 categories, if you think about the basic science, if you think about the laboratory experiment, and very fundamentally think about the trial stage of testing a technology, China is contributing to the development of a new technology as much, if not more, in some areas than American society. So we will have to work it out. I think it's very complex, sometimes it needs specialized knowledge, but it's very difficult for the public narrative in the U.S. to accept the fact that, look, the Chinese are not getting this for free. The Chinese are contributing as much to the advancement of different technologies. And there is unless you can really pinpoint a violation of a particular contract, a clause in the contract, this accusation of theft, this accusation of eating America's lunch of technology, you have to prove it. You have to make the case. And there are many ways to make a different case, saying without China, probably America could not get that way either.
And another thing that will be consequential is how will business people plan for their future? Zhao Hai, according to a survey by U.S.-China Business Council, 91% of those surveys said their China operations were profitable. 87% reported no plans to shift production out of China. So if any Biden administration restricting technology transfer will have consequences on their business operation, American businesses in China.
I think there will be. However, I want to make one correction quickly. I don't think there is a tech war going on between U.S. and China. I think there is American bullyism against China, and that's one way street. So this is very important for American to make the changes first. And that's why I think Politburo member Yang Jiechi said today that China wants a predictable and constructive relations with the United States. That's very important for the business across both countries because they need a stable, predictable, constructive environment to work in. Without such trust between the two countries and with sanctions throwing around every day, it's very difficult to have normal transfer of technology and normal cooperation.
Mr. Zhao, finally, if there is one area where China-U.S. relations can take some baby steps in Biden time, what will it be?
The first thing is vaccine cooperation.
I can come up with 2. One is actually to allow the scientists, especially health scientists of the 2 countries to talk to each other without having to fear some sort of political retribution, especially on the U.S. side. And secondly, they really should take another look at the Fulbright and other student exchange programs. Look, even when the 2 countries were in active warfare, we're talking about 1940s, the 2 countries had scholarly and student exchange. So these are the kind of things that should happen.
Yes, indeed. People-to-people exchanges will build trust. Thank you very much. We're running out of time. Thank you, Mr. Zhao, and thank you, Zhao Hai. And you've been watching Dialogue here on CGTN. I'm Zhou Yue in Beijing. Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.